When I look back on my life, I realize how much of it was built on a fragile bubble of beliefs I clung to because they felt safe. I thought success required sacrifice, that happiness could wait until I made it, and that love, real love, would withstand anything. These beliefs shaped every decision I made, for better or worse. Growing up, I was always the guy who thought he needed to prove himself. I wasn't the most confident, not the guy who got the girl in high school or landed the dream job right out of college. My life felt like a constant uphill climb. I thought, once I have enough money, once I have status, people will take me seriously. Then I'll be happy. When I met Chloe, everything seemed to change. She saw something in me that I wasn't sure even existed, a potential, a spark. She didn't care that I was still figuring things out, that I didn't have the six-figure salary or the fancy car. She believed in me, and for the first time, I thought maybe I could believe in myself too, but that belief came with its own pressures. I started to think I owed her everything, success, security, the kind of life she deserved. I convinced myself that love wasn't enough on its own, it had to be backed by achievements. And so, I worked harder, stayed later at the office, chased every promotion, thinking I was doing it all for her. The truth is, I was doing it for me too. Deep down, I was terrified of failing, not just in my career but as a partner. I feared she'd see me the way I sometimes saw myself, as a guy who wasn't quite enough. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was to the cracks forming beneath us. But at the time, I didn't see it. I couldn't. At first, Chloe and I were inseparable. She was everything I had ever dreamed of, beautiful, intelligent, and so full of life. We would stay up late talking about our future, our hopes, our dreams. Everything felt so right. I thought I had found my person, the one I was meant to share everything with. But somewhere along the way, things began to change. I don't know exactly when the thought first crossed my mind, but it lingered. It grew louder with every passing day, each moment I spent away from Chloe, each missed conversation. Maybe this isn't working, I thought, but the idea terrified me. How could I even consider ending something so important? We had built a life together. I had dreams for us, for our future. And yet, in the quiet moments, when I allowed myself to think clearly, the truth was undeniable. I was no longer the partner she needed. I remember the day I made the decision. Chloe and I were sitting on the couch, and I could feel the distance between us more than ever. It wasn't a fight, it wasn't anything dramatic. It was just the weight of the silence, the tension in the air that couldn't be ignored any longer. I looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't see the woman I had fallen in love with. I saw someone who was quietly waiting for something, anything, to change. I wanted to fix it. God, I tried. I even told myself, if I just work harder, make more money, maybe that'll be enough to make her happy. But it wasn't. The truth was, I had been neglecting her. I had neglected us. I was so focused on building a future that I didn't see the present slipping away. The love we had once shared felt like it was being suffocated by my ambition, by my need to succeed. The guilt was unbearable. I hated myself for even considering it. But I knew deep down that staying in a relationship out of obligation, out of guilt, wasn't fair to either of us. And so, I made the decision. I told Chloe that I thought we needed to take a break. I tried to explain it as best as I could. But words felt so inadequate. The moment the words left my mouth, I could see her face crumble. I knew she hadn't expected it, but I also knew it was something she had sensed all along. I just want us to be happy, I said, trying to hold back tears that threatened to spill. But I don't think we can be together anymore if we're both feeling this way. She didn't argue. She didn't beg me to stay. Instead, she just nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resignation. In that moment, I knew I had broken her heart. And in turn, I had broken my own. The next few days were a blur. I thought I'd feel relief after making the decision, but I didn't. I felt empty, like I had just thrown away the one thing that had once meant everything to me. The guilt and doubt gnawed at me constantly. Did I make the right choice? Was I really doing what was best for both of us, or was I just running away from the hard truth? I didn't know. But I did know one thing: I couldn't go back. The damage had been done. And all I could do now was try to move forward, even if I had no idea what that future would look like. The days following the breakup were some of the darkest of my life. I thought I had been prepared for this moment, that I had made the right decision for both of us, but the reality was far different from what I had imagined. There's a huge difference between making a decision and living with it. And living with this one felt like carrying a weight on my chest that I couldn't shake off. I spent hours thinking about everything I had thrown away. Chloe's laughter, her kindness, the way she looked at me like I was her world. It all felt so distant now, like it belonged to someone else, someone I used to know. I kept asking myself, what if I made a mistake? What if we could have worked through this? But I couldn't answer those questions. The gap between us felt too wide to bridge. I was still caught in my own ambitions, still drowning in the demands of my career, and I knew deep down that Chloe deserved more than I could give her at that moment. What stung the most was the silence that followed. No angry words, no shouting matches, just a quiet, painful separation. It was like we had both given up on each other, even if either of us wanted to admit it. But I couldn't deny it anymore. I had failed her. And in turn, I had failed myself. I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into work, keeping my mind busy, but nothing worked. I kept seeing her face everywhere, hearing her voice in the back of my mind. The harder I tried to move on, the more I felt like I was suffocating. There was no escaping the regret, the doubt, the constant replaying of every conversation, every mistake I had made, but there was also anger at myself. At the situation, at everything that had led us to this point. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to escape from this feeling of helplessness. Why had I let it get this far? Why couldn't I have seen the signs earlier? I wanted to go back and fix things, to undo all the wrongs, but I knew I couldn't. The path had already been set, and yet, amidst the turmoil, there was a small voice inside of me that reminded me of something important. Sometimes, we have to let go of what we thought we wanted in order to make room for something better. It didn't make the pain go away, but it gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was a turning point. Maybe, just maybe, there was a lesson buried in all this heartache. I didn't know how long it would take to heal, or if I would ever fully understand what went wrong. But I had to believe that, one day, things would get better. I had to believe that this wasn't the end. It was just another chapter, painful as it was, in the story of my life. I thought I had it all figured out. I was successful, driven, and I had a clear path ahead of me. But nothing prepared me for the way the breakup shattered me on the inside. There's something about losing a relationship, especially one that you thought would last forever, that makes you question your very worth. I suddenly found myself questioning everything about myself, my choices, my priorities, my abilities. For weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed. It wasn't just about losing Chloe, it was about the loss of the man I thought I was. Was I really that bad at balancing work and love? Was I incapable of truly loving someone? The weight of that doubt sat heavy on my shoulders. I could hear the negative voices in my head, telling me that I was never good enough, that I wasn't worthy of love, or that I would always put my career before everything else. I couldn't help but compare myself to others, couples I saw out enjoying life, smiling, laughing together. People who seemed to have it all, with no real struggles. Meanwhile, I was here, feeling like a failure. The loneliness was unbearable. I had always been proud of how much I had achieved, but without Chloe, all that success felt meaningless. The emptiness inside me gnawed away at my confidence. It felt like I was just a shadow of the person I had been before. There was also the fear of being judged. I kept wondering if people were talking behind my back, whispering about how I couldn't even make my own relationship work. It felt like I was failing on all fronts, not just in love, but in life. The truth was, I didn't know how to fix it. How could I rebuild my self-esteem when everything I thought I knew about myself had been thrown into question? The hardest part wasn't just dealing with the absence of Chloe, but dealing with the absence of my own sense of self. I had spent so much time proving my worth to the world, to my career, that I hadn't realized how much I had neglected myself in the process. I had forgotten what it meant to feel whole, to feel good enough just as I was. And yet, amidst all this self-doubt, something in me began to shift. I realized that self-worth isn't something that should be tied to another person or to external success. It's something that comes from within. The process of healing, though long and painful, began with me learning to forgive myself, to accept that I was human, that I made mistakes, but I was not defined by them. I started working on myself, not just on my career, but on who I was as a person. I started to reconnect with the things I had lost sight of in the rush to succeed, my passions, my hobbies, the things that made me feel like me. Slowly, I started to rebuild my confidence. Not because of my success, but because I was learning to accept myself for who I was, flaws and all. It wasn't easy. Some days were harder than others, but with each step, I felt a little stronger. I realized that in the end, I wasn't a failure. I was just someone who had made mistakes, learned from them, and was growing into a better version of himself. It was a painful lesson, but a necessary one. The hardest part came after the decision was made. The silence, the space that had opened up between Chloe and me, was unbearable. It wasn't the quiet of peace, it was the quiet of unresolved emotions, of love that once burned brightly now flickering out. I had known that the breakup would hurt, but nothing could have prepared me for the depths of emotional turmoil that followed. I woke up every day with a gnawing ache in my chest, as if my heart had been torn out and left behind. I couldn't escape the memories. Everything around me reminded me of her. The coffee cup she always used, the book she left on the counter, even the smell of the shampoo she used. It was as if my whole life was a constant reminder of the love I had lost. And no matter how hard I tried to move forward, I kept tripping over the past. I didn't expect to feel the way I did. There was a part of me that had convinced myself that after the breakup, I would feel free, relieved even. But in reality, I felt completely unmoored, like I was drifting in a vast ocean without a compass. There was an emptiness inside me that I couldn't fill. I kept thinking back to the good times Chloe and I had shared, the laughter, the little moments of affection, the dreams we had talked about for the future. And it all seemed so distant now, like a life that belonged to someone else. What made it even worse was the guilt. I couldn't stop asking myself if I had made the right decision. I knew deep down that it was the best thing for both of us in the long run, but the immediate aftermath felt like a brutal slap in the face. I questioned whether I was just being selfish. Had I done this for myself, to make my life easier, or was it truly what was best for Chloe? I kept replaying our last conversation, wondering if there was something I could have said differently, something that could have changed her mind, changed everything. The emotional roller coaster was relentless. One minute, I'd be angry at myself for the way things turned out. The next, I'd be overwhelmed with sorrow, wishing things had been different. It was as if I was constantly swinging between two extremes, regret and anger, loss and longing. Every day was a battle between my head and my heart. I couldn't escape the sadness, but I also couldn't ignore the part of me that believed I had done the right thing. I was torn in every direction, trying to make sense of it all, but nothing made sense. I started withdrawing from my friends, feeling like I had nothing left to give. I didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to admit how much pain I was in. I thought I was supposed to be stronger than this, more composed, more capable of handling the weight of the situation. But in reality, I felt completely lost. I had lost Chloe, yes, but I had also lost a part of myself in the process. It was a strange feeling, that heartbreak. It wasn't just about missing the person you loved, it was about the loss of the future you thought you were building together. I had imagined a life with Chloe, kids, a home, growing old together. But now, that future was shattered. And the uncertainty of what lay ahead was the hardest part of all. The future had suddenly become this vast, unknowable thing, and I didn't know how to navigate it without Chloe by my side. But even in the depths of that heartbreak, I couldn't help but wonder if this pain would eventually lead to something better. If, in time, I would heal, and perhaps even find a way to rebuild my life. I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew I couldn't let this pain consume me forever. There had to be a way forward, even if I couldn't see it yet. It was the moment of truth, the point where I had to look at myself in the mirror and ask, what now? My heart and mind were at war. I had already made the decision to walk away, but every fiber of my being was torn between staying in the life I knew, with all its pain and familiarity, or breaking free and embracing an uncertain future. Each option seemed to carry its own weight, heavy in its own way, with its own consequences. For weeks, I had gone back and forth. The guilt would come first. Maybe I hadn't given it enough time. Maybe I had made a rash decision. After all, Chloe and I had shared so much. Could I really throw that all away just because we had hit a rough patch? Was love something that could just be fixed? That could heal with time? The thought of giving up on everything we had built together felt impossible. But then there was the other side, the side that argued for moving forward, for stepping into the unknown. Staying in the relationship felt like holding on to something that was already slipping through my fingers. I wasn't happy anymore, and neither was Chloe. The tension was palpable between us, even when we were silent. We both knew we had changed. Our needs, our priorities, they weren't aligned the way they used to be. We had been growing apart for months, maybe even longer, but neither of us had admitted it. I tried to imagine a future with Chloe, and it seemed so distant. The way we used to talk about our dreams had changed. It was no longer about building a life together, it was about survival, getting through the day, putting on a brave face for the world. I kept asking myself if it was fair to either of us to continue living in that shadow of what we once had. It wasn't just about Chloe, it was about me too. What was I sacrificing by staying? I had spent so much time focusing on my career, on building a future that I could be proud of, but I had neglected the emotional side of things, the relationship that was supposed to bring me joy and fulfillment. I couldn't ignore that any longer. I had to ask myself, what do I really want out of life? What am I willing to fight for? The hardest part was that the decision wasn't clear-cut. There was no magic answer. I couldn't just flip a switch and suddenly know what was right. The pain of leaving Chloe was immense, but so was the pain of staying in a relationship that no longer brought me happiness. How could I continue pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't? But could I really let go of the person I had once believed was my soulmate? I had to take a step back, clear my mind, and be honest with myself. I realized that the reason I was struggling so much wasn't just because of the breakup. It was because I had invested so much of my identity into the relationship that I didn't know who I was without it. Chloe had become a part of my world, and letting go felt like letting go of a piece of me. But I also knew that holding on to something that wasn't working wasn't fair to either of us. It was the hardest realization, but it was also the most freeing. Staying in a relationship out of comfort or fear wasn't love, it was just familiarity. And familiarity doesn't always mean happiness. After much soul-searching, I realized that the hardest decision I had ever made might just be the one that would lead to my greatest personal growth. Letting go wasn't about giving up, it was about creating space for something new. I had to trust that there was more for me out there, that the future I had once envisioned was still within reach, just in a different form. After the breakup, I felt completely adrift. I couldn't do it alone anymore. The weight of the decision, the loneliness, the self-doubt, it was all too much. So I reached out to my friends and family. My brother, Jack, was the first to listen. He didn't judge me, didn't offer empty advice, he just listened, and that made all the difference. He reminded me that it was okay to feel lost, but I couldn't stay there forever. I needed to heal. My best friend, Sam, was there for me too. He wasn't afraid to be blunt. "You did what you had to do," he said. "Now it's time to focus on yourself." His words helped me see that, while the pain was real, it wasn't the end of everything. I had people who cared about me, and their support gave me strength. I hadn't realized how much I had isolated myself in the relationship until I was alone. But now, I was starting to rebuild my support system, and it felt like a small victory in a very dark time. I realized that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, it was the first step toward healing. It wasn't immediate, but over time, I started feeling a shift. At first, it was tiny, just a small moment of peace in the morning or a laugh with a friend. But it was enough to give me hope. I wasn't going to feel like this forever. I found strength in the routine of my day, in the small victories of getting through it without being overwhelmed by grief. I began focusing on myself, rediscovering things I had put aside for so long. I took up running again, something I used to love but had abandoned. The physical effort felt freeing, like I was pushing away the sadness little by little. I started reading books that inspired me, watching movies that made me laugh, and slowly but surely, I began to find pieces of myself again. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the sadness returned, but I realized healing wasn't a straight line. It was full of ups and downs, and each day, I was getting stronger. I had to let go of the old idea of myself, the person who was defined by his relationship, and learn to stand on my own. Slowly, but surely, I was becoming the man I needed to be, not for anyone else, but for me. As I healed, something inside me shifted. The breakup, though painful, lit a fire under me. I realized I had been living too much for others and not enough for myself. So, I threw myself into my career, focusing on growing my business. It wasn't just about making money anymore. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of more than I had ever thought possible. Every success, no matter how small, felt like a victory. I started feeling more confident, not just in my work, but in who I was becoming. My finances improved, but more importantly, I was rediscovering my own worth. I was no longer someone defined by his relationship or past mistakes. I was a man building something for himself. With time, I gained a sense of strength and independence I hadn't known before. I wasn't just recovering, I was evolving. The man I was becoming was someone I was proud of, and that gave me a sense of fulfillment I had long been missing. It wasn't long before I met Emily. At first, I wasn't sure if I was ready for another relationship. But Emily was different. She was kind, patient, and most importantly, she understood the journey I had been on. We started as friends, and over time, I realized that maybe I wasn't as broken as I thought. The idea of opening my heart again terrified me. I had been hurt, betrayed, and I wasn't sure if I could trust someone new. But Emily didn't rush anything. She allowed me the space I needed to heal, and over time, we grew closer. With her, I started to see that love wasn't about perfection. It was about accepting each other's flaws and supporting each other's growth. For the first time since the breakup, I felt hope. Not just for myself, but for the possibility of a future with someone who genuinely cared for me. It wasn't instant, but I began to believe that love, true love, was something worth trusting again. As time passed, I began to realize that the love I had with Chloe wasn't the only love I was capable of. Emily and I grew closer, and in her presence, I found a peace I hadn't felt in years. She didn't try to replace Chloe. Instead, she made me realize that love wasn't a finite resource. It could evolve, and there was always room for more. What surprised me the most was how easy it felt to be with Emily. She didn't ask me to be someone I wasn't. She accepted me as I was, flaws and all, and that was the first time I felt truly seen in a relationship. With her, there was no pressure to be perfect. We laughed, we shared dreams, and for the first time in a long while, I felt excited about the future. We traveled together, built memories, and most importantly, I learned to trust again. The walls I had built around my heart slowly started to come down. With Emily, I found a love that wasn't about the past, but about who we could become together in the future. And for the first time in a long while, I believed in the possibility of happiness. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far I've come. The journey wasn't easy, and there were moments when I thought I'd never make it through the pain. But the heartbreak, the healing, and the growth all led me to this moment, the man I am today. A stronger, more confident man who knows what he wants and what he deserves. The lessons I learned from the breakup weren't just about love, They were about self-worth, resilience, and the importance of never settling. I had spent too many years doubting myself, questioning my choices, and trying to live up to other people's expectations. But now, I know that happiness doesn't come from pleasing others, it comes from finding peace within yourself. Emily and I are building something beautiful together, but more than that, I've learned how to love myself again. I know that no matter what happens, I can handle it. And with her by my side, I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving. The road to happiness wasn't a straight line, but it led me to the place I'm meant to be. And that's a place filled with love, trust, and endless possibilities.